Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Welcome to a sponsored webinar by Jedox, hosted by CPO Australia, titled Managing Uncertainty with Reforecasting and Scenario Modelling. My name is Patrick Viljan, and I'm the Learning Curator for Micro-Credentials at CPO Australia, working within our education team. We have people joining us from all over the country for today's webinar. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. It's now my pleasure today to invite from Jedox Stefano Giordano, Partner Account Director for Australia and New Zealand, and Alex Patterson, Consultant Solution Advisory. Today we'll be taking questions through our Q&A box, so just to reiterate, please direct all questions to all panelists. We will address questions at the conclusion and we'll do our best with the time remaining. For any troubleshooting queries, please send a message to the host, also using the chat box function. It's now time for the session to commence, so I will hand over to Stefano Giordano.
Thank you, Patrick. Excellent. So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. So, I would like to start to explain how we structure today's presentation. So, we have decided to summarize real scenarios of how organizations go about in improving forecasting and scenario modeling. We are blessed that in our space we can help organizations of all sizes and from all industries fixing problems through technology. I will position it from a theoretical aspect, highlighting the challenges and what we see are the next step that an organization should follow to improve. And then my colleague Alex will run you through a realistic simulation. So this session is actually quite hands-on. So what are the typical factors that cause challenges to organizations today? I mean, on the side of COVID-19, that clearly highly disruptive and recent, but even before COVID, global environment had quite profound impacts on organizations. The world changing quite rapidly, factors like globalization and the exponential digitalization requires speed and agility in organizations. So the business impact is normally that competition is much more global, will allow companies to buy and sell products and services internationally, and that opens door to increase profits on one side, but it also throws you in a situation of ever increasing competition against which every organization wants to prevail. Organizations face a market that is ever changing, environments are changing, and forces companies to react and adapt more quickly to any new circumstance. System infrastructures deal now with big volume of data and information, that the new oil, and too often this data comes from many and isolated systems. And this data is available to management usually from a financial focus, and therefore doesn't help to consider the entire operational and value drivers of a company. Systems in an organization often provide mainly transactional insights because they're built to execute transactions, and that certainly is not enough. And the impact on decision and planning processes is that organizations need to get an aggregated bird's eye perspective, right, to manage an organization. So this is the really big challenge. And decision and planning processes are often slow due to manual and Excel-based processes that are time-consuming and error-prone. So ultimately, the impact for user is that on one hand, they need to be faster, and on the other hand, their system and processes do not allow them to be that agile. So what is needed to be successful? So we don't believe that companies need to drastically change on how they plan and manage their business. Management and management processes in general haven't changed. Normally starts with a strategy that you break down in financial plans, then operational plans are derived from this. The operational plans are then executed and reported on, and then analyzed and optimized accordingly. So this forms a circle, right? And this circle should turn. Now the difference is that the circle now needs to turn faster and faster. Previous challenge that is digitalization. So in the past, finance and the FP&A function had a strong focus on financial planning and financial data. But today, departments along the value chain need to be integrated. This is if an organization wants to really understand the impact of different activities on the company's result. Finance data needs to combine insight from all divisions, sales, procurement, HR, supply chain, production, you name it, any division in an organization that plan and adds value. So therefore, the Office of Finance needs to evolve and elevate into a strategic advisor to the company to support decision making. And that's quite a modern topic of the evolution of CFOs and offices of finance. Now, all this needs to happen in a collaborative approach, not at a department level with individual tools. It needs to be continuous. It's not enough to make an annual budget and then execute on it, right? The speed of the wheel is not allowing this anymore. And technology is out there today, right? This needs to now be smart and automated. It needs to be using artificial intelligence and machine learning that should give a helping hand get the granular data of an organization analyzed, right? The speed. So we go back to how we see organization actually taking this approach. We call them 3 steps, give them the name automation, collaboration, and transformation. The first step allows speed, right? Allows for your processes to move faster. So eradicate manual processes to refine data, right? This should just happen at the click of a button and should deliver consistent results because of processes are now automated. And it should also give the one version of the truth. There should not be different spreadsheets with different versions. Everything should be connected to one set of data. I would like to give a real example. Weeks ago, an organization approached us, sizable organization, thousands of employees. Their month-end process takes 5 to 6 days each month. That's 60 to 70 days a year. That could be dramatically decreased, freeing up a lot of time for the Office of Finance to add more value and be a business partner to the organization. The collaboration step should allow an organization to get early warnings indicators. Right? Processes are harmonized. There is an understanding of why something is happening and not only what is happening. And this should also give insights of operational drivers. So this stage or solution needs to be integrated. It needs to be driver-based planning. Data doesn't need to be residing in separate divisions. The solution that an organization needs to aim to achieve needs to be agile. If something changes, data sources are coming in the business, they need to be easily connected, incorporated. And ultimately, it needs to be open. The data needs to be shared in an ecosystem, it needs to be tightly integrated to all systems, and people of the organizations need to be able to use it and work collaboratively. And the third step, we call it transformation. It's a level where you automate the forecast. And you can use pattern on how the business is developing. And this can happen continuously when using machine learning. And this way as well, you can easily understand the impact of changes by analyzing drivers and patterns. And checking the quality and refining data should happen also automatically. Right? The cumbersome processes of refining data by hand that tentatively happens now should be done by a machine. So we see companies often start with the first step, the automation task. It is the easily achievable. It can be achieved quite rapidly and gives a lot of value. Imagine we just started the journey with that organization, but from 5 to 6 days, we should bring down a process like that in maximum half a day. And then potentially the rest of the time in analyzing the data from one end, or again, creating and taking on different more value-add tasks. But organization can actually start at any of these 3 levels. We've seen organization that jump straight away to the third one. It can also happen. And then some companies are already at different levels today, and then they can start from wherever they are. So that's what we see is the journey to improve forecasting and analytics processes in an organization. I would like now to hand over to my colleague Alex, that will actually show you a real simulation on how this can look like. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Stefano. I'll just quickly share my screen. I'll take you through a live demonstration. Give me 2 seconds, please. And that should be showing up any second now. So firstly, before I begin, the demonstration I'll be taking through today is more really of a live storytelling. So I want to introduce the scenario I'll be running you through. Very much related to what we're going through today, spoiler alert. So firstly, just on the company that we're sort of demoing today. So it's called Bikers Best, and it's a bike manufacturer. It's not a retailer, so it's actually B2B. It sells to retailers who then on-sell to consumers, just to give an idea of sort of the business and how it operates and how it plans. So it manufactures bikes and bike components in its factories located around the world, and it purchases the individual components from other suppliers. So it doesn't manufacture it from the ground up. And as you'd imagine, because of the nature of the business, it's sensitive to changes in retail markets, such as implications from COVID, as well as other changes in global supply chain and labour markets. So that's sort of a bit of background on the business, but I'll dive into that in a little bit more detail in a second. Now, what's the scenario? So, ongoing COVID pandemic. Now, you won't be surprised this scenario today. It's a surge in cases has prompted governments to enforce lockdowns. We're actually rewinding the clock a little bit. This will be sort of modeled more around some of the more earlier lockdowns that we saw. And what has this done for the business itself? So the impact on Biker's Best has been somewhat limited in terms of direct impact, but its impact to its actual B2C customers is more of the focus of today. So what you can see here is the retail store closures for non-essential businesses have affected sales performance for their bricks and mortar retailers, of which, unfortunately for Biker's Best, are the majority of their customers. So what I'll be taking through today is how Biker's Best can very quickly adapt to this uncertainty and these changes. And the steps we'll be taking is firstly, on that transformation point that Stefano mentioned before, we're going to be using AI to really quickly predict and reforecast future sales. Secondly, we'll be revising our complete organizational and operational plans in line with this new forecast. And thirdly, we're going to take steps to basically ensure that we retain our margins and cash, and we obviously ensure the financial health of the business. Then lastly, I'm actually going to talk about how we can use scenario modeling to perhaps, once we've avoided crisis, to take advantage of any opportunities that may present themselves. Because what we've seen in terms of the businesses we're talking to is COVID has, in some instances, presented risks and presented sort of negative impacts to businesses, but in others we're seeing instances where they're actually wanting to better respond to opportunities that have presented themselves, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a second. Now, one of the key points Stefano mentioned earlier was around collaboration. So today I'm going to be assuming a number of different roles within the organization. These will be generic, not specific people, but they're to do with different areas, departments of the business. So first up, we'll be talking a lot around finance and finance's role in this whole process. And what's important to finance users and finance professionals to actually enable agile reforecasting and scenario modeling. So the first is really the automated collection and consolidation of data. And I can show you how a platform like Jedox can actually support that. Secondly, how you can speed up and enhance planning and modeling using AI capabilities. And lastly, that sort of real-time collaboration with other parts of the business. So there's no silos and there's no essentially waste or days waiting to pass plans back and forth between different parts of the business. Secondly, we'll be talking about sales, which is sort of the most impacted area of this particular scenario, and what's important to them to be able to respond to this quickly. So the first, similar to finance, is that immediate access to results, in particular, in this case, sales results or historical data. And then secondly, if you're going to have to then revise your sales plan, you need to be able to do this quickly across different plans that are required within the organization. So most businesses that do sort of sales planning obviously have a range of different ways that they can do that, and they have to reconcile it at the end. Generally speaking, we tend to refer this as different ways of top-down and bottom-up planning. Thirdly, we'll be taking the role of a couple of different parts of the operational organization. And the key things that will be important to them would be the immediate access to that sales plan as it's being worked on and collaborated with, to see how it's going to impact operations and what they need to do to adjust and control costs. To do that as well, to make those adjustments and control costs, they need to be able to quickly manage operational inputs and assumptions within their own planning. And this is to do not within sort of financial values, but in their own operational drivers and metrics. And finally, we're going to be discussing the role of the executive in all this. And importantly, how they can essentially maintain a real-time top-down view of all of this as it's happening, keeping their finger on the pulse, so to speak. And then to be able to take the outcomes of this planning process and this reforecasting and scenario modeling to then develop events and initiatives that they can use in the future. And the example we'll be taking is how to sort of take advantage of maybe some upcoming opportunities within the market. Okay, so that's the scenario and that's the roles we'll be taking. So first up, we're going to be jumping into finance. and I'm going to be jumping into predictive forecast. So this is really to introduce the scenario. Now, a couple of things I wanted to point out within here. I've jumped into our predictive forecasting area of the platform. And this organization does predictive forecasting based on a time series prediction. So right now we're looking at a forecast 3+9, so it's a quarterly reforecast. And it takes the previous 3 years of historical data for units sold and any months that have been actualized in the year. So as new months come through, the machine retrains itself and improves the prediction and prediction accuracy of forecasts. And what you'll notice, sort of true to the scenario before, is there's been a pretty remarkable drop in units sold in the first 3 months of the year due to these lockdowns. Not a minor drop, as you'll see, quite a remarkable one. So we're dealing with quite a substantial crisis for the business. Now, our system can essentially take this data and run it through a number of different machine learning algorithms that you can see down there. And this is based on a best fit methodology. You can select certain algorithms and there are a range of industry standard ones that you can utilize. But ours is a best fit model that essentially takes the one with the highest level of accuracy and uses it to create a prediction for the remaining months of the year. It also sets a lower and upper bounds based on the confidence interval. Now I'll just zoom into that so you can see that in a bit more detail. And you can see that the confidence sort of decreases over time, obviously, as we get more further into the future. So we've created this prediction. Now, before I go on, I just want to reference, I'm expecting potentially a couple of questions on AI. Jedox and CPA did a webinar on AI recently, so would recommend that you check that out if you want to learn more about AI within FP&A and XP&A. Okay, but now we've generated the prediction, and we want to see what is the impact on P&L. So I'm going to jump into our annual plan. Just close this up to give this a bit more retail. We're going to jump into our annual plan. Load that up. So what you'll see here is our summary P&L accounts, topped off by total revenue and cost of sales. And right now we're looking at our sort of year-to-date actuals, and then our budget and that forecast that we developed earlier. Now, the thing you'll notice is because it's been reforecast, you're actually seeing a massive drop in total revenue. Yeah, quite substantial, 140 to 17, not a minor drop. And what you'll notice is if you're looking at sort of gross profit and operating profit, that actually has caused a loss forecast within the business versus quite a healthy result that was originally budgeted for. So how can finance react to this? Well, within this particular model, what this business can do is quickly revise budget and connect it with all the other different parts of the business. So I'm going to do that quickly. First, I'm going to actually copy our original budget because it's got all that rich detail around operational metrics and plans, and I'm going to copy that into a revised budget. So this is an automated process that I can just do it at a click of a button. It takes a few seconds, and it copies obviously all the P&L, balance sheet and cash flow data, as well as all the operational plan data as well. So that's completed successfully. I'll just close that. And then if I jump into here, I'm just going to open up the revised budget. What you'll notice now, we've got the revised budget and the budget next to each other. And if you look at the figures, you'll just see it's a carbon copy of one or the other. So we've copied all of that data across. Now, before I start actually revising the budget and updating it, I just want to talk a little bit around how this model operates and how this business plans. So to do that, I'm going to jump into the driver tree. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the annual plan or the P&L model that we were just in before. So that sits over here. And this maps automatically to produce essentially budgets and forecasts for your balance sheet and cash flow, which I'll show a little bit later. But your P&L accounts aren't generated by essentially entering data in a values-based process, what we call. It's done through drivers-based process, which means that things like total revenue and other revenue lines are essentially linked to sales planning modules that are potentially even owned by the sales team within the organization. That's sort of the collaborative XP&A example that Stefano mentioned before. So that's from a revenue perspective, but also other accounts within your P&L are also linked to other sort of cost or expense focused plans. In this case, you can see we've got a production and a purchasing model that sit within those two teams within the business. And other ones including HR, CapEx, and leasing that are important for this particular business. Now, this is tailored for this particular business. These aren't standardized models. And the expectation is for your business to react quickly is you would actually have fully tailored models where operation or parts of the business can actually plan in the metrics that matter to them. So if you think from a sales perspective, for a bike manufacturer, it sells or it plans in terms of units and units price. In terms of production, we're talking the production quantities, any waste factor, and the bill of materials that need to be procured to actually support production. The key thing you'll note is that when we talk about integrated planning or XP&A, there's an integration between sort of the operational arms of the business and finance. But importantly, to speed up planning, we're also talking about integration between plans and other parts of the business. So importantly, what I'll show today is what happens when sales updates their revised budget and how that can immediately push through an updated production quantity or demand for production, as well as purchasing and any other areas of the business. So everything's talking to each other throughout that whole process. Anyway, enough of that, let's jump in. So we've revised the budget. So now I'm actually going to assume the role of sales. So the revised budget process is kicked off. And I'll just jump back into the annual plan. So now we're going to update that total revenue figure through the sales plan. So I'll just jump back in. Now to do this, I'm just going to go first into our top-down planning sheet. So I reference sort of different ways in which the sales team can plan. So you can see right now we're looking at Europe for a particular legal entity, and I can drill down further into the different countries if needed. And you can see we've got sort of our previous year actual result forecast 3+9. That was what was generated by the predictive forecast, and our revised budget here. Now, I'm just going to roll this up to instead focus on the total business because that's what we're interested in. And you can see this is our forecast 3+9, and this is our revised budget. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that forecast 3+9. And please note that numbers will be different because this is the one from the previous year. So I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to copy the forecast 3+9 from this year. Copy that across, and you can see that's now updated our top-down sales plan. And that's done it for all customers, as well as if I drill down through all different regions, different customers, and in a second, actually different products and other components within the sales plan. So I'm not going to stop just there because obviously, revised budget, it can be slightly more complex than just sort of taking what was predicted by the machine. Your sales team and as well as other operational teams need the ability to adjust to make those plans more realistic. So the machine can do great work in terms of the speed of predictions and the baseline accuracy, but you need to empower your staff within your business, particularly other areas of importance within the value chain, to then make adjustments to that based on their expertise and their sort of specific knowledge. So to do that, I'm going to first jump into our bottom-up plan. So this actually takes that top-down revised budget that we were developing and actually automatically splits it into all the different products, customers, and months at this point. So you can see right now we're looking at, again, sort of Bikes Best and Europe across the whole area, but I can sort of drill down even further to a particular country or customer if needed. And you can see we've got our product groupings here, but I can actually drill down and expose right down to the individual product level if required. And you can see in this case, we're not entering in gross revenue as we were before. We're actually entering in units and units price. And that's back calculating to give us gross revenue. And that's what I mean about drivers based and planning in the relevant operational metrics. So a couple of things I can do here, now that this has obviously been copied across from the top down, is I can make some changes to it. So I can come in here, say into road bikes, and maybe I want to update, a certain product. In this case, let's increase by 5% the entire year. So click that. That increases that, holds the price. You can see it increases it all across the different months, and then gives us different gross revenue figures for that product. Similarly, I could do that for an entire product group. I could come in, and even for a particular month, I could come in and I say, want to increase March by 10%. I'm going to use a shortcut command in this way. I'm going to hash 10% and hit enter. So that increases it by 10%. And that does it there. So enabling essentially your sales team to really quickly plan at every level and refine their particular sales plan. So this is one example we can do. Another common one we see within sales planning is key account planning. So I can jump into a key account plan template here. You'll notice that we've got our bottom-up budget here, and I can then come in and actually just copy that across for our key account budget and then make further adjustments if needed. So I'm going to go through there, copy our bottom-up budget, and I'm going to do it for units and price. And then maybe I might adjust price in this one. You can see there's an empty one here, so I could potentially copy that across from one of our other key accounts if it's a new one. And there are a whole range of other things I can do here to quickly generate a key account budget. And if I tick off the monthly view here, I can actually see it as compared to a couple different other plans, such as actuals and that bottom-up budget that we developed earlier. So that's really sales planning done, obviously quite quickly. But now if I jump back into our annual plan, what you'll notice is if I jump back in, and let's just jump back into last budget, you'll notice that, that within the revised budget, now that total revenue figure has adjusted to reflect our predicted forecast and any adjustment made by sales. Now that's great, but what you'll notice is all of our expense items have still held from our original budget. And this means that under the current revised budget, we're obviously seeing a loss at both the gross level as well as across all operating activities. Now, to address that, we actually need to go into some other areas of our business and ensure that they incorporate the latest sales figures into their plans and take any other steps necessary to control costs. So to do that, I'm going to jump into operations, and I'm going to start by jumping into our production planning, which is the step after sales. And I'm going to jump into our production sort of quantity setup now. And what you'll notice is within this particular model, it dynamically copies across the latest sales quantities. And you can make some adjustments before you actually commit this to our production model in this case. So we've got a wasted addition adjustment. So as part of the production process, maybe you want to set up an assumption for any waste incurred throughout the sort of assembly of your individual products. As well, you can also allow the team within productions to make any adjustments they see necessary. So from a waste perspective, I can come in here and I can change sort of our waste factor month to month if required. I'm going to leave that the same for now. And then for production quantity, potentially, maybe to support it, I want to sort of increase inventory for one particular month, or I want to, move forward production earlier for 1 month just to sort of level things out a little bit. I could come in here and say, enter 1K, 21K, 1K, hit enter, and I can adjust this prior to committing this to our production. Let's say I'm happy with this. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and commit this. So I'll click that, and that's going to run a process that will then allow me to look at our production lines and make any adjustments to that as well. So that's completed. So now I'm going to jump into our production lines. So the first thing you'll notice is if I'm looking at our production lines, so this is across all the businesses, there are a couple different steps. if you think about bike manufacturing, we get those individual components, they're varnished, then they're assembled into the final product, and then there's a final examination before they're obviously shipped to our retail customers. Now, because we're seeing such a huge decrease in sales volume, what you'll notice is we've got an incredibly low utilization across all of our assembly lines. So this was previously set up based on that original budget. But now what the production team can do is take the necessary steps to control costs, by reducing man hours on certain assembly lines, maybe doing some other things. So I'm going to take a couple of examples now. First, I'm just going to jump into this assembly one as an example. So I'm going to click into the details here. Now, there are a couple of things that we can change. And you can see right now we're looking at all the different sort of months of the year. I can jump into sort of our net operating hours. And these are some of the operational inputs that we can play with within this particular production model. So we can look at the days per month that this assembly line is active, the number of shifts, and the number of hours per shift. So currently, because we were forecasting quite a high number of sales volume, that we're actually managing 3 shifts per day at 6 hours each. So what I can do is actually just reduce that to 2. Number 2 shifts, or maybe even 1 in this case, because it's quite low utilization. So 1 shift per day, and then potentially, I could hold that at 6 hours, but realistically, you're looking at a demand of 680 hours. So I could actually reduce that further. So I could even go to say 2 hours. Obviously, there we go. Maybe I'll bump that up just to 3. So you can see the utilization changing in real time. So I can come in here and say go 3 hours in this case, and that's a lot better number of utilization. And these all relate to cost items that we've seen on that P&L. So in this case, HR costs in this example. There are a couple of other things we can do as well. If I look at the actual demand of products through this assembly line, I can click onto this. And there are a couple of things we could do. So for example, if we had inventory existing for this particular product, I could actually release that instead of actually running the assembly line and incurring costs of that. So if I had built up inventory, I could just release that and reduce costs in that way. I could also transfer or reallocate production to another assembly line. So an example of this would be, it'd probably be the opposite in this case, but we've got 3 assembly lines producing the same product. Lower utilization, we probably just want to condense that into the one. So that's what we could do within this transfer component as well. So now if I jump back into here, what you'll notice is that assembly line has been updated. We've reduced the operating hours. The utilization is a bit more appropriate. And then we can do the same thing for all their other assembly lines as well. And that would obviously reduce our costs quite dramatically. Now, these assembly lines relate to obviously producing those end products. But the actual demand in pieces relates to the bill of materials that needs to be procured. So the next step within that is actually then, if I jump into the bill of materials, it'll be more easy to see. So you can see, look at a particular finished product bike, and it relates to a whole range of individual components that need to be purchased from other suppliers. So now this could be handed over to the purchasing team to actually look at updating their purchasing quantities now that the production plan has been updated as well. So in this case, I can come into here. We're looking at our budget revised. For this individual component, it all comes from the one supplier. And currently you can see this is our production quantity of just over 2 million. But right now within our purchasing plan, we were planning on purchasing just under 29 million. So we really need to update that to make sure that our purchasing costs don't blow out. So I'm going to come into here and I'm just going to copy plan production. And that'll update it now in line with our production quantity. Now, there's other things you could do in the purchasing model as well in this business, obviously looking at vendor prices, vendor contracts, things like that, but I'm going to keep it simple for now. And now I'm just going to jump back into our annual plan. And touch wood, you'll be seeing a much healthier revised budget. So if I compare that to original budget, obviously, unfortunately, lower revenue, but we've controlled that cost of sales to the point where actually we're now seeing gross profit and an overall profit from operating activities. So great first step. Now, there are a whole range of other expense items that we haven't touched here. These relate to other operational planning models, HR planning, CapEx, leasing, for example, but we're going to skip those for today. Instead, we're going to focus on some of the other expense items that are under the remit of finance, just to control and manage. Typically within XP&A, these are your straight line, simple expenses. So to manage this, I can go into our cost center planning model. And this just allows us, if I jump out to the monthly details, it allows us to essentially manage all our other sort of straight line or simple expense items. So this is our cost center plan, and you can see we've got our cost elements on the left-hand side here, our actuals from previous year, and then this is that revised budget, which hasn't changed from our original budget in this case. Now, you'll notice that there are a couple of whited out rows here. I can't click and edit these because these are actually developed via our operational plans. So, salaries and wages are controlled within our HR planning model. But these ones here, I do have access to. So to revise this, I could potentially come in and maybe I want to reduce marketing expenses. We don't see it as necessary. We want to control costs. So I could come in and let's just say I want to make it 80% of what it originally was for the entire year. Look at that. And that reduces that expense down there as well. IT costs, I could do something similar. Perhaps we were planning on procuring some new system in September that was going to increase our recurring cost, but I want to reduce that. And so now I just want to hold that all at 15K. So I can come in there and click that, and then sort of that held that cost through to the end of the year. And there are some other things we could do. Similarly, I mean, a great example in COVID is rent and electricity. So, if you think about our corporate offices, they're not being used anymore in certain states. So we can potentially reduce rent and sort of reduce our budget for electricity and other expenses like that. But I'll skip over those for now. And this allows us to essentially just manage all of our different costs within the business, not just those that sit within operational plans. So I'll jump back into our annual plan. And whilst those changes I made won't be as significant as what was done within the production and purchasing, and what you'll notice is an even sort of better operating profit that we're working towards now. Perfect. So that's really the P&L done for revised budget. But the next logical step is to look at how can we take that revised budget and use it to look at our future balance sheet and cash flow. So I referenced before within the driver tree how these are connected within Jedox, and I want to jump in and show you how that actually works. So from balance sheet, how the system can make that automated and make that quick is by running a balance sheet projection. So I can jump in here, and this actually allows me to control that projection. But how the projection actually works is if I jump into the configuration here, is our system will automatically look at the P&L that we produced from our revised budget, and it'll look at a whole range of configurations that are set up within here. So the first example, or an obvious example, would be payment terms. So if I look in here, so payment terms for trade and other current payables, so just jump in, you can see we've got, generally speaking within the business, we've got 3 terms. So 50% first term, 20% and 30%. And so before running this, maybe there's been a successful sort of supplier renegotiation, and so we can actually change that to be 30% here, and then maybe 50% here, which will just help us with cash flow. So now that that's done, I can jump out of this, and obviously there'll be a whole range of other configurations that you can make to sort of improve the accuracy of that balance sheet projection. Now I can come in and actually run this projection. So I'm going to run this for the revised budget, and I'm doing it for the total group, but obviously I could do it for segments because different parts of the business might have different configurations. So I'll start that. And as I referenced before, what this will actually do is it'll look at all of our P&L accounts and the values associated with them. It'll look at the terms set up within the configuration. And it's actually going to create a whole series of journals within Jedox that will simulate a revised budget for balance sheet. It takes a few seconds to maybe a minute or so, but I'll just keep checking on that as it's running. And you can actually have a whole range of different configurations. As I mentioned before, you can have them for different parts of the business. You can have them for different parts of the year as well. So you could change it, say if your payment terms change mid-year, you can update that from a certain sort of period onwards. And I'll just keep checking to make sure that's completed. So what this has done, if I jump into the posting journal, you can actually see some of the journals that have been created. This is sort of budget. If I jump into budget revised, you can actually see this is what's been created, or this is 2020. Let's go to 2021, where I've actually created these. Now, what this means is if I go into the balance sheet statement here, I can actually see our sort of opening and closing balances month to month. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to move through the next portions of the demonstration a little bit quicker. The next bit component is cash flow. So cash flow is a little bit simpler. It's automated through a simple mapping between balance sheet and cash flow, which you can set up within the system based on your methodology. And what this means is whenever your P&L and balance sheet are updated within the tool, both for sort of actual reporting as well as for budget and forecasting, you actually get an automated cash flow statement. So I can jump into here and let's go into our revised budget. You can see we've got our annual result as well as those month-to-month figures. And I can jump out of that monthly view and you can see a bit more of an annual summary versus say our original budget and our previous year actuals. And that's all automated. So we've successfully sort of looked at, we've revised our payment terms within our balance sheet and we've ensured that we've obviously got positive cash flow throughout the year. So I guess in summary, we've quickly, from a planning perspective, we've used AI to quickly generate a prediction on future sales. And I've shown how the business can actually work, or finance can work with the operational and other parts of the business to really quickly collaborate and ensure the business remains profitable through planning and revised budget. And then how we can quickly make sure that that also converts to balance sheet and cash flow health as well. So the last piece of the puzzle is just really around the executive role in all of this as well. So I'm going to jump into back into the annual plan just to show. So in fact, I might skip ahead just because we've got a certain amount of time. So within this particular business, they've got a strategic planning set up. And one executive within the team has obviously figured out what many of you might be thinking about this particular business is that, well, obviously, retail closures will affect sales, but demand for bikes would probably have increased within the market because people are stuck at home and all they can do is outdoor exercise right now. If you're in certain states in Australia, I know that's what really all I've been doing lately. And so they can actually foresee really an increase in demand, and they want to take the opportunity to make the most of it. They want to develop a plan and then be able to act on that plan quickly. So in this particular example, that executive has been talking to some of those key accounts, and they're actually working on developing their online retail channels, which will be unaffected by the lockdown. And then the business wants to then be able to really quickly, as we've reforecasted before and adapted that into our revised budget, we want to then be able to quickly adapt to any increases in online channels and ensure that we can ramp up production and purchasing and obviously take advantage of that opportunity. So to do that, I can jump into this strategic planning template. And what this allows me to do is basically set a number of different scenarios based on some of our current plans within the tool, and then overlay them with specific initiatives and events that the executive will be considering. So in this case, we've got our best case scenario, which is based on a combination of our actual from previous year, which is typically a best case when you're working COVID times sometimes, I mean, a worst case would be that current forecast. So you can see there's a pretty wide gulf between revenue in terms of those two scenarios. And our strategic is just that revised budget that we were looking at before. So in terms of the actual initiatives, there are a couple that we've sort of generated first, but I want to look at this last one here, which is the increase in online retail channels. So what we've done within here is, and this is a completely separate version, is we've actually mapped against P&L, balance sheet and cash flow, the impact of increasing demand from some of our retailers based on online channels. And you can see this particular initiative and started within August and is sort of ramping up towards the end of the year. It also includes not just the revenue implications, but obviously any cost of sales with production and purchasing that were developed within those models. And what we can do is actually really quickly, I can actually model the impact of adding that to our revised budget without obviously adopting it. So you can see as I include and exclude that, it automatically updates the P&L. Now that's obviously great for looking at the P&L, but because this is obviously synced dynamically to balance sheet cash flow, if I jump into scenario analysis, you can actually see the impact of that scenario, which is the blue line here, on P&L against obviously our best case, but as well as against that the revised budget that you can see before. And it's quite obviously a stark increase there. And that's just not on P&L, but also in terms of cash flow and other lines in terms, including down here, you've got total revenue and administrative expenses. And so that scenario is going to be developed and held within the tool. And as I've adapted as I sort of incorporated the predictive forecast into our revised budget before, you can do the same with then that strategic scenario that you're working on. And so all I'd need to do to repeat the process quickly is come in here, and instead of copying the budget, I can actually jump in and start with our strategic. And that's sort of how we can close the loop. And you can see the business can do this iteratively and quickly to respond to any changes that are upcoming. Perfect. So just a time check. That's it for the demonstration. So I might just hand back to CPA, who will take us through Q&A. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex and Stefano, for quite a contemporary presentation. And I think, this product's pretty key to what we're dealing with across Australia, New Zealand, and globally at the moment. So a couple of questions that have come in. First and foremost, when you were going through the presentation, Alex, and sort of making changes to assumptions, and that flowed through to the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement, I think probably more from an audit trail perspective, which is where I think this question is coming from. Are those manual changes recorded somewhere or saved down somewhere so we can sort of backtrack in terms of what we've done?
Yes, the short answer is yes. So our tool and many of the other technologies that you find have an online audit trail, so that any changes are tracked. The users log in through username and password, so you can see who's made the change, when it was made, what was actually done. It's all tracked within the tool.
Awesome, thank you for that. And then the second question we received was to ask, can this tool be used for industries other than production or manufacturing?
It's another good question. I obviously considered making this non-industry specific, but I thought it was best to tell the story specific to one industry. So the answer to that is completely yes. We have customers who work across industries. I might defer to Stefano, who works with them pretty quickly, if you want to add to that answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there are tools out there that are as flexible as Excel, meaning industry agnostic or neutral. Any client from the banking sector to a government or for profit of any size can leverage technology of this kind in the market.
And then just one other question, and this is something which flagged up for me as well. So you showed us how to revise the budget using that predictive forecast kind of approach, right? So if an organization only wants to shift over to using a rolling forecast, is this something which would be supported by this product as well?
That's a good question. So the answer to that is yes, and currently we were looking at a revised budget because we wanted to sort of show a business at a point in time in that sort of maturity curve that Stefano mentioned. But we're obviously seeing a lot of businesses within the market move towards a rolling forecast because it increases the ability for the organization to be agile and to respond to these events in a much more iterative way, where we're seeing annual budgets in some industries become sort of slowly a thing of the past. But I guess I want to also preface that to say that obviously you won't see the end of budgeting within some industries, say government. There's still a use for it, but particularly in things like retail, we're obviously seeing a lot of businesses move towards just using a rolling forecast.
Yeah. And then just leading on from that, so as we're going through the process in terms of having various iterations happening and changes being made, presumably there'll be a point in terms of where we would want to lock that down into a specific version or scenario. So it probably, and this is more a question, would it be able to provide us with a mechanism of doing that, of locking down the scenario from further changes and just sort of securing a specific model at a specific point in time?
Yes. So what I didn't show within this presentation was workflow, because I wanted to obviously just be quick and sort of get through the story. But our tool has a workflow component. It basically allows within all of these different processes I ran through, so production, sales, and so forth. You've essentially got all your tasks, automated notifications, and so on and so forth, due dates all set up within the tool. And when approvals are sought and then confirmed, it can lock down these budgets and versions for further editing. So all of that's been built in.
100%. Cool. Thank you very much. I received a comment from one of our panelists about how to eliminate the chaos, which is Excel, but I think that's more a statement than really a question that we can answer in this forum, to be fair. Just checking through any other questions that have come in. There was one again that came in just congratulating you on the presentation, but then asking, I just need to know if the model can do prediction over future years based on 1% or one. Sorry, let me just rephrase this. So I just need to know if the model can do a prediction over the future years based on a percentage of increase or reduction in terms of production. So linking the production back to the prediction over the future years.
So I'll add to that sort of generally, but then I'll dive into sort of specifically on that question. EPM products have been obviously designed, and Jedox has been designed to be able to replicate any planning that you're doing within Excel. So that particular scenario can be handled by us. It just wasn't done within this particular demo. But your organization and all organizations plan slightly differently. And so if you're wanting to do, say, prediction over future years based on sort of like a simple sort of top-down input, in this case, that could be sort of a sensitivity analysis or a scenario model where you look at sort of changes in percentages. We've certainly seen that done. An example within sensitivity analysis, if you're looking at, say, sort of like a 5-year forecast, would be what's the impact on labour costs if they increase year on year, and you can actually see real time what that can do in terms of your current plan.
Awesome. Again, I'm just mindful of time as well. So in the absence of any further questions, Alex, Stefano, thank you very much for a very contemporary presentation. And I think, just to reiterate the point I made earlier, quite something which is useful and needed by organizations as we negotiate very uncertain times at the moment. And with that, I will hand back to Lauren.
Thank you, Stefano, Alex, and Patrick, and thank you to everyone for your participation. In the next 3 working days, you'll receive an evaluation survey accompanied by the recording of this webinar. We really appreciate your feedback, as it is extremely valuable to CPA Australia to help us deliver better events for you. Thanks again, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar shortly.